Let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Micro School on Visual Studio Code, part 2. Our speaker this morning or this afternoon is Dean Brandt. Dean is a PhD student at Stellenbosch University in his second year. And he already gave us the first introductory talk on how to use Visual Studio Code. And today he will add some more refinement to the use of this app. Yeah. So Dean, please, we only have 15-20 minutes, so over to you.
Sure, thank you for the introduction, Prof. I'll share my screen and get started. The best way to do this. We'll be jumping a bit back and forth between browser and VS Code to show some of the additional features. So in the first micro school, it was an introduction to just getting VS Code installed and getting it up and running and going through a simple Jupyter notebook in Python to be in line with the previous micro schools of Matplotlib and NumPy to show that Visual Studio Code is a much nicer text editor and can be built into a IDE, integrated development environment, to do all of your programming in here with a lot of nice little tools and tricks that you never really even need to leave the application. So what I wanted to focus on today is 3 or 4 topics, specifically getting started with GitHub Copilot, with working remotely through SSH or into your own WSL instance if you have a Windows machine to work on Linux, to look at source control using Git, which is very easy in Visual Studio Code, and possibly towards the end, hopefully look a bit at debugging in Python in Visual Studio Code. So the first thing that I mentioned was we'll have a look at GitHub Copilot, which is, as seen here, the world's most widely adopted AI developer tool, which is also in the name, Copilot for while you program. That is an AI programming assistant that can help you achieve certain tasks in the code or write a few snippets for you, complete some of the more tedious sentences or functions that you're writing. And that is all within Visual Studio Code. It can be with a few other IDEs, but it is very well integrated with Visual Studio Code and easy to get started with it. It should be mentioned that it is, because it is linked to the recent trend of LLMs and things like, it is also in part based on OpenAI's product of I believe it's their GPT 3.5 model that has been tweaked a little bit to be better at programming. But as such, it is not really a free service, but it does cost, I think, $10 a month. But fortunately, if you're a student and you have a student email, then there's a very nice service of this GitHub Student Developer Pack, which should be easy enough to find online. Just searching out for GitHub Students, GitHub Education, anything like that. And it's very easy to sign up just by giving them proof of registration and linking it to your GitHub account. And they give a lot of free software and free trial links to a bunch of different software services that you can go through the site and see that it's almost an endless list of a lot of free things that you get. But the main one that we focus on now is it gives you free GitHub Copilot for your account. Once you've gotten started with that, it's very easy to then get going with using GitHub Copilot in Visual Studio Code. Firstly, you'd have to come here to settings and go to the profile tab, your accounts, and actually connect it with your GitHub account and your GitHub Copilot so that you can link the services. That you'll also see possibly down here in the bottom right, there will be a GitHub Copilot options list. It will lead you to install the GitHub Copilot extension here, which you can find on the marketplace just through searching for GitHub Copilot. And that'll come with all of that additional features, which I'll show some of them now. But essentially, once all of that is up and running, it should be fairly self-explanatory on how to go through those steps. It's made very easy on purpose. We can get started with a little demonstration. I can just for now make a very quick bland Python file. And immediately you can see here that the first line that's here in kind of grayed out text in the background is it's prompting me to ask GitHub Copilot to do something, or I can just start coding to do what I want. So we can use this feature. I go Control I, and for an example, I can just tell it to generate some basic code that would be easy enough to do, but a bit tedious. I can tell it to create a class of a linked list, which is fairly common in programming and in computer science. And just like that, within a few seconds, faster than I could possibly type it, it is written out all of this, a class, 2 classes with a bunch of methods inside of them, just like that. And I can accept it, I can discard it, I can tell it to redo it if I see that something looks a bit weird. But essentially this is good enough just like that. And then say if I do want to, another way to use it is if I do want to, for example, add another method here of, for example, to reverse the list, or let's just see what it comes up with. I can, even there, you can see as soon as I start typing something, it'll come up with a suggestion. And I can immediately either press tab to accept the whole thing, or word by word with a control right arrow, but I can just press tab, and then there it's got the whole next part for me. I can do a similar thing of prompting it with comments by making a comment here and then telling it to make or reversing it. And then from that, with a bit of time, sometimes it's a bit slow. It'll come up with that based on the comments that I've given it before that. And it makes it very easy to interact with your code here as well, where as part of the extension, there's a GitHub Copilot chat in here. And you can tell it to do any of these prompts, so you can interact with it the same way that you would with something like ChatGPT, where you can tell it here for the first example that comes up to say, I can highlight some code and then tell it to explain how the code works. And it'll use that context to give me an answer, like using ChatGPT without going back and forth and copy pasting. But how it does it all here within Visual Studio Code, which is very convenient for having your workflow all in one place. Think that is mostly all of the examples for now. There's plenty more that I encourage you to play around with and see what you can find and see how it assists your workflow and how it can really be a very good co-pilot. But I should very much stress here that it is not something that just codes for you and is perfectly good every time. It is an AI, so it does still struggle with making things correct, that it is kind of just mushes a bunch of code and words together and hopes for the best. So it is, you do absolutely have to review all the code that it generates. So it is more time saver and can be used as a tool, but it doesn't take away all of the heavy lifting from you, but you should still be doing the thinking work of making sure that it all is coherent and makes sense, but it can take off some of the tediousness for you by generating some stuff that would take you a while to think about, or instead of you going to looking at documentation for something, it can usually fill in typical things that you would see and find. But definitely you have to verify it every time to make sure that it works. Even I've made the mistake of trusting it a bit too much sometimes, and it does come back to bite you, that it is not always perfect. Okay, so now that's been shown, I would like to get into the next part of showing how to do remote work with SSH. And this is going to be a bit more specialized for if you already are using SSH to connect to a remote server or a computing cluster or something like the CHPC, for example. But how to connect with that within VS Code and then do all of the coding that you want on that server instead of having to back and forth all of your files over SSH and SFTP. So immediately you can go right onto the bottom right here where there's this little box to open a remote window, and it'll give you this whole long list of options because it also does give ways for you to connect to things like a AWS instance or something on Microsoft Azure servers through whatever tunnels. But for now, I'll give the example just by connecting to the CHPC, where you can come here to connect to host, and there you can see there's already a few that I've configured, but usually you come to this plus and then add new SSH host, you type in your usual SSH command with your address and give the password and go through that first time initialization of it all. But for now, because I've already got these saved, I will show the example of connecting to this. And with one click, it opens up this. I can enter a password, which I don't have on hand. I have it in a password manager. But yes, from here, then it just opens up a new instance. And then as if you were there, you were exactly in a new window, just coding on that CHPC. When you open a terminal, you are on that remote machine, that it all works pretty much exactly the same as working on your own machine. Everything brought basically in-house again. And it links very closely to the WSL example that I want to talk about, because it uses the same exact method to get there, that it treats it as if it is SSH connecting into another remote server, but rather it's just into the WSL Linux instance that you have. For those that don't have WSL and you are working on a Windows machine, I would highly recommend it. It saves a lot of effort in dual booting or virtual machines or anything like that. But instead, you can just open up a regular terminal. Once you have it installed, you can just type WSL and it'll boot up a Linux instance within your terminal as a Windows subsystem for Linux, which is very, very useful and saves a lot of effort going back and forth. And then just like, yeah, immediately I'm in my Windows, I'm in my Linux instance. So from that, I can go again to this open remote window, and immediately, yeah, the top option here is connect to WSL. I can ignore this file for now. It's just an example. And it opens up the new window. It starts opening it up in my Windows Subsystem for Linux instance. You might run into a problem here with running this for the first time, that it'll tell you to install certain extensions of, I think that needs a remote SSH extension or WSL extension, but that's all just from this extensions marketplace and should prompt automatically. But you only have to do that once, and then like this from here, it's very easy. You can see that it tells me that I'm connected to my Ubuntu 24 instance. And even here in this terminal, immediately I am in a Windows Subsystem for Linux terminal, and I can open my folders and get going as usual. It even offers the ability to take some of the extensions that I've had on my local machine and copy them onto the WSL machine. So you can share your extensions as well and make the workspace fully copied just onto working remotely, so as if it is working on the PC that you have right now. Okay, and now I believe I can get onto the next topic, which is using source control, which is also a very useful one. And in a way that you don't need to ever run any of the tedious Git commands into your terminal, but that you can do it all from the UI. And even immediately here with this file explorer with nothing opened yet, it does give the ability to clone these to clone a repository that you have from GitHub. Once you've got the Git extension, the GitHub extension, and you've logged into your GitHub account, then it should be very seamless, where you can go clone repository, clone from GitHub. I've already got one established here, just a dummy one. I will just copy it to the base folder. It'll clone the repository. I don't have to git pull or git add origin or anything like that. Just immediately 2 clicks, and I've got a remote repository from GitHub built in here. And this remote repository I'll give a look at to see how it is working is a brand new repository that I made just for this example that is still needs to be set up, but you don't have to do any of the command line interfacing to get there, just with a few clicks and it's cloned onto the machine. And now we are working, yeah, I can make a file here. Installing for my Windows Subsystem for Linux. Like you can see now for an example for how easy it is to get up and running with extensions again. But to come back to the file, I've just made this blank file here with just a very simple print hello GitHub. And you can see already things start looking a little bit different. That's here, there's a weird green highlights to it. There's this U here, which stands for it being untracked. And on this branching thing here for the source control, it shows that there's something going on. And that means that there's been some changes but that haven't been tracked or committed or anything, and that there's still work that can be done. And you'll see also in the rest of the UI, there are these other little boxes down here that show that it is connected to the GitHub repository that is working with the Git branches, specifically the main branch. And from here, I can stage this change and just as easily come here, commit and push. It gives some trouble because I haven't set up some of the Git details, but essentially you come here and commit and push after a bit of setup, which I've skipped over here, pardon the hastiness. And that would directly then correlate to uploading it to the GitHub repository. We would ask you then for your commit message, which you can type in very easily here, or it'll prompt you in a new window to make sure you do the commit message. And just like that, with a few clicks, then it's easily taken care of. There is also a very useful extension to make all of this even better if you are using Git a lot in your workflow, called Git Lens, which is they call it the supercharged Git in VS Code, which offers a lot more insight into your Git workflow and the history and the changes that are made to make it a lot more UI heavily focused, that you can see everything that's going on with your Git pushes and your Git branches and everything really involved there. That does also unfortunately have a bit of a price attached to it, as part of the Git Kraken is the company that makes it, and they have their Git Lens, that they are free trials. But I believe there is also, as part of the student developer pack, they do give a pretty good offering here for free Git Lens for the entire duration that you are a student. So I would again encourage you to make use of the GitHub student developer pack, because it does offer a lot like this. And yeah, that covers those things that I wanted to mention. The last thing I want to mention now, I will just quickly have to switch screens for a moment while I get this set up again. Okay, get back to VS Code. And this is just a very arbitrary file that calculates some factorials. But for what I want to show with this is the process of debugging in VS Code in a way that makes it very easy and very insightful to see exactly what's going on with all of your code when you are trying to debug it, instead of putting print statements everywhere, but that you can systematically go through everything that you need to do. And I believe that it is built in, but it might still be an extension. Again, that's kind of the power of VS Code, is that everything's an extension, that you can make it your own customized IDE. But there's this option to run and debug your file. And that'll come with this extension of a Python debugger, where you can select between any of the possible frameworks if you're using a web framework or anything, but this is just a basic Python file. So yeah, I do have to select the Python interpreter first, which VS Code nicely reminds me of. And it will run this code for me and take it through the debugging process. And because no bugs were found, it didn't bump into any errors, it went through it very smoothly. But what I can then do is, if I am curious, for example, to see what happens partway through this whole file, or this whole function, sorry, or through any of these functions, especially it's useful to show when they are a bit nested. And for example, on this line, it uses a few different things and refers to this is even function and all of that, that I can here, let's say for just an example, to see if I want to find out what's going on here. If I move my cursor over to the left by the lines here, you can see this red dot pop up. And here it offers the option to click to add a breakpoint. And what a breakpoint is it is a point where in the code, when your debugger is running through it, it will reach that point and kind of stop there and give you options to go through it in a bit more of a deeper, insightful way. you'll see what I mean now. When I've put that breakpoint there, then I can run and debug again. And you can see it's a bit different now on the menu, where it gets halfway through the execution of the code and it stops here at this breakpoint. And you can see a bunch of menus have popped up here where it will tell me all of the local variables that I have that I've defined already, which is from the above or from here where everything's passed through of, I have this list of numbers that are then defined here. It goes through this for loop to find for number of numbers. It gets the 0th number. There are global variables that it could list if there's a different function. There's a call stack here where it sees that I'm going through this process numbers in the entire module, and that you can go step by step through all of the functions that are being called to see what the stack of functions is. And then this top bar that shows up here, what gives a few options. I can either continue with the loop to finish the execution or go up one number. So I'll go up one more iteration. I can step over the function, which just completely jumps to the next point in the evaluation of this. And I can jump past to this if statement. I can step into this function, which just takes it one step deeper into. If I step into that again, it'll take me to this factorial function, because you saw here, this line, if I'm stuck here and it's calling this factorial function, if I step into that, it'll take me to where it goes to call that function. And it'll be this defined factorial function. If I step out of it, it'll take me back there. I can then restart the entire process. I can set different breakpoints. I can edit how this breakpoint works, where I can give it an expression to evaluate only when this number is equal to when, for example, number is equal to 8. Only then will it have that breakpoint. And I can restart the debugging process, and then it'll come straight to when that number is 8, then this breakpoint will evaluate, or the breakpoint will trigger. And I can stop and I can go and just debug in much deeper process of seeing exactly what's going on with the code, and step by step see where things are going wrong, to really be able to find those little tricky bugs that are hard to squash, that I'm sure everyone has experienced before. So yes, that covers the 4 main extensions and abilities of VS Code that I wanted to share. And yeah, there's many more to explore, and I really encourage you to all to go deeper into all of these different options and see what you can find and get used to and uncover for yourself. But this is hopefully a good way to get started with all of those topics and all of these extensions and ideas, to show that yes, VS Code is much more powerful than whatever you've typically been using, unless you've been using another IDE altogether. But compared to in-browser Jupyter Notebook, this can do much more. And yeah, I hope that has been very useful and good to learn. I know that these things are very useful for me when I first learned about them, so I hope that I could share that with you.
Thank you very much, Dean, for the very nice introduction. And I see the clapping of some of the
Thank
participants. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. You just show us the feature of the GitHub Copilot. I'm just curious, if I've already written my program and then I open it in the VS Code, and without highlighting a specific part, can I ask question in the chat box of the GitHub Copilot? General question, for example, change that function, change this function, or I need necessarily to highlight and copy paste in the chat box?
Yes. So just on the last point, you don't need to copy paste it all, just by highlighting whatever function is, it already knows the context. But yes, you are right that without highlighting anything, it will still have all of the context of your code base or whatever file you have open, even other files just in the workspace folder that you are working with, as long as you can tell it what you are referring to. So if you tell it to alter whatever your function of factorial, for example, without highlighting anything, you can just talk to it in the chat and it will know by context. It'll look through all of the code that you have and make changes there as you need it to. So yeah, it is very hands-off and useful to interact with it as if having a ChatGPT built into your code base and into your code editor.
So you mean that if I open my file, it's enough? Then the GitHub Copilot automatically knows what's going on in my, for example, Python code.
Yes, even the files that you don't have open, I believe that it does look through all of the files in your workspace as context and can use those to refer to each other.
Okay. I was thinking that maybe just Cursor AI has this feature. So you mentioned that GitHub Copilot also has this feature.
Yeah, I haven't experimented with it too much on that level, but I believe that it does work that way. Usually I just use it as a auto-completion and I ask within the file, but the chat I haven't used as much, but I believe that it does work that way.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. Then, Dean, if there are no urgent questions, thank you very much for this very nice mini school. We will, it has been recorded, so we will upload it in our collection of, not mini school, of micro schools. Thank you very much. And hopefully soon we will send out the announcement of the next one. Thank you very much. Thank you also to the online participants. Thank you very much.